Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry. The other day we were doing the egg-shaped placemats and the table runner that goes with it. And I was sitting here doing some long arm work with some circle rulers. And it came to me that we ought to do some mug rugs to go with those. So let's go ahead and do that. So really, you can use anything that is circle shaped. This plastic ruler that I have is 4.5 inches around. And it's nice because I can see through it, so I can fussy cut, but you really don't have to see through it. And I'm going to make up a template for you that we'll have in our group to download on a PDF. And if you print that out on copy paper, you'll almost be able to see through the copy paper anyways if you lay it down onto your fabric. And so basically all I did was I lined it up to the picture that I want. Then you can either use a chalk pencil or you can use one of the Frixion pens and just trace around. Once you've got it all traced around, then I cut it out. You want to do the same with your batting and the same with your backing. So now that I have that done, all I need to do is make my crisscross lines for my quilting. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. So all I do is I set up just one spot, and I'm going to make it look kind of like I'm coming at an angle down over my mug rug. So I'll make my first line. Then I'm going to make my next line, since this is a small item, I'm going to make my next line so that it's 1 inch away. I keep this Creative Grids 1.5 by 6.5 inch ruler right next to my sewing machine at all times. It comes in real handy. I love it. Has nice little grippies on the bottom so it doesn't slide on me. So I'm going to do a 1 inch line away from that line. Let me turn this so that I can draw properly. And then I'll just keep doing that across until I run out of room. Let me see, that last line was, I better use a different color because I can't see the green going across the green. That's a little bit better. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn it. So I did my lines this way. I'm going to turn my lines, my mug rug, so I'm going at an angle this way. So I'm going to kind of end up with crisscrosses. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Go back to my green. Actually, I'm going to take this off of here because it's not wanting to do it on top of the batting too well for me. And then once again, we're just going to do the 1 inch marks across. Turn this again so I can see what I'm doing and draw it out. And these marks will go away as soon as I press it. Okay, so my lines will, this is the top side of my mug rug, and you can do them however you choose. It doesn't matter. It's just so that we can quilt it, basically. So you could, if you do free motion quilting, you could even do like a circle feather on here, or you can have your crisscrosses going a different way. It's really totally up to you how you want to quilt it. So let me get this back together. I kind of almost, I wanted to have my lavender going straight up on the back. And of course I've got my lavender flowers going straight up on this side. And I've got my batting in the center. And since I'm going to be doing the crisscrosses, now if this was a larger item and I was going to do Stitch in the Ditch, I would do it with my walking foot. But since this is such a small item, I'm just going to use my Stitch in the Ditch foot. If you don't have a Stitch in the Ditch foot, then you could just use your regular foot and just follow the lines and have the lines so that they line up with your center red mark in your foot. And you'll just follow that along. I'm just using the Stitch in the Ditch foot because it has that little guide in the front and I can use it to follow the lines. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm using Aurifil thread. I'm using the 50 weight because I've already been using that as I've been doing other stuff, piecing and whatnot. So I'm using a lavender color. I think that will look pretty good on the top. Now, whenever you're doing something like this and you're quilting it, if you go in this direction when you do the first row, you want to turn it and go in the totally opposite direction for the next row. If you don't, this is going to pucker up if you continue to keep going in the same direction, and it will actually cause the top fabric to slide a little bit in that direction. So in order to avoid both, we're going to keep turning it and going in the opposite direction. So now I'm doing all my lines that are going in, you know, straight across this way first, and then I'll turn it and do the opposing lines going in the other. And I'm going to turn my machine down just a little bit so I'm kind of Speedy Gonzales. Not when I drive in a car, but when I drive my sewing machine, definitely. And this doesn't take very long. This is a pretty quick project. So just make sure that you're turning it each time, each row of stitching that you're doing. Okay, so I have all the first of my lines all done. Now I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to do the ones that are going the other way. little bit off my line there. Oh my goodness. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. This is just a small mug rug. I'll just move over a little bit for my other line. It's because I was trying to do one-handed sewing. It'll look a lot better once I press it and you get rid of the lines so you can't see my where my lines were supposed to be. So I've got all my stitching done, which was pretty quick. I'm just going to go around the edge and I'm going to trim off my extra threads that are sticking out. There, clean that all up. Normally I don't worry about those when I'm doing binding, but because this is such a small piece, I don't want to have to fiddle with sticking on my extra threads underneath my binding. So we're going to be binding in a circle today. And once we go around, I'll show you, we're going to clip it. I'm going to leave a little extra on the end. Let me see, I'm going to be starting on this side over here. And you're going to be doing a 1/4 inch, so I'm going to switch over to my 1/4 inch guide foot. You can, of course, use your regular foot and just watch your 1/4 inch on your plate. And you're just going to turn this as we're going. We're just going to turn as we go. So I'm going to have this down. I'm going to sew a little bit and then I'm going to turn. And I'm going to pick up my binding a little bit. So it's going to look, let me see if I can get this in camera a little bit better. As I sew and go around, I'm going to lift up my binding so it's going to look like that as it goes around. And that's just after I've sewn it, of course, not while I'm sewing it. And that's just going to give me room to keep laying it down as I go around. So I've readjusted my camera so that you can get a little better view of what I'm doing. And we're just going to do a 1/4 inch going around, just like we would if we were doing regular binding on anything else. And I'm going to set my stitches on 2.0. Okay, there we go. And as I go, I'm just going to turn. I'm going to stop and I'm going to let it pivot. And I'm just going to do like 3-4 stitches and then pivot. And you can see, hopefully can see, I'm just pushing up my binding as I go, letting it gives room to be able to lay this flatter as I go around. And you don't want to pivot too soon because you want to be able to get this flat. So just a little at a time so we don't create puckers as we go. And I hope that you can see, I'm just kind of pulling it up. It's almost ruffling on the back side, but I'm keeping it flat here so that it doesn't pucker. And we'll do some clipping on our curves so that when we go to do our binding on the other side, it won't pucker on there. And you could make these a little bigger around, but I sort of like the 4.5-inch size. Or you could even make them square. Now once you get a little bit close, I'm about, I'd say about 2.5 inches apart. Oops, didn't mean to hit my camera. I'm going to cut my thread right here. And so you're just going to kind of lay this around, and I'm going to put some pins in for just a moment so that I can figure out what distance I need going around. Just so I see how much more I'm going to need of my binding so I can connect it. I'm going to put a pin in this side. And once I have it close enough that I can see how much I need, I'm going to group it up together, both pieces. Keep them straight above each other. And I'm going to trim. I keep hitting my camera, I'm sorry. So I just kind of put my fingers between them when I'm joining like this. Let me see if I can get that so that you can see. I'm just putting my fingers between like this. And I know that that's going to give me roughly 1/4 inch. Now you could put a pin. Another way to do it would be to put a pin right there. And you could mark 1/4 inch from that pin up so that you know where to cut. And I'm going to hold them together. I'm just going to make sure that they're lined up with each other. So I'm going to get this straight when I trim it. Now, depends on if you're brave or not, of whether or not you want to mark it so that you're, 100% accurate. I do a lot of stuff with 1/4 inch between this and doing long arm and whatnot that I usually can guesstimate pretty well. So this is always the trickiest part, I feel, of doing binding, is joining your pieces together. So you need to flatten out this one side here. We want to get that flat. And we need to get our right sides together. I'm going to trim that thread and get that out of my way. So I'm going to get these both flat up against each other. Make sure you're not twisting your binding when you're doing it. Making sure that you can see in the camera. I don't want to twist my binding. I'm just going to kind of fold my piece together in half. And I'm going to line up my two pieces so that they're front side to front side, or right side to right side rather. And I'm going to first get this side so that it's all matched up. And once I have this side all matched up, I'm going to put a pin right in there. And then I'm going to pull this side over, and I'm just going to hold it until I get it to my machine, and I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch right across here and join my two pieces. And it can be a little tricky holding it. You want to try to get a nice straight stitch without puckering your pieces. Once you're about halfway, you can take your pin out, or you can wait until you're closer to the pin. I'm going to adjust the bottom piece because I can see that it's laying crooked. And I'm going to get these laying flat on top of each other again so that I can hold it with my fingers so that they're nice and flat like that. And then just cut my thread, and then I'll trim the excess threads off so they'll be out of my way. So then I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to finger press my seam so that it's open, like that. And then I'm just going to let it fold back together so I have a complete circle again, and it's all joined up. And then I'm going to start my sewing just a little bit past where before I stopped. So I stopped here. I want to start my stitching a little bit up here so I secure my stitches. First I gotta get this to lay down flat again because it's wanting to curl up. And if it's curling up too much before where you're gonna start, you can do a little clip right up to the stitches, but don't cut your stitching. And it will just ease that a little bit so it can lay a little bit more flat for you. And I'm just going to make sure before I start sewing that I've got this nice and flat. And then I'll go ahead and continue to sew my binding. And you've just got to continue to do the same thing that we were doing. Kind of pull this part out of the way, get it nice and flat so that your raw edges are meeting up. And it can be a little tricky, but these are small. They go pretty fast for the most part. And if you see it puckering, just play around with it until you're able to get it flattened out. And you'll continue to go around until we get back to where we started. Trying to keep my fingers out of the way so that you're able to see as I go, which is always a little tricky when we're doing binding. I might end up with a small pucker right there, but And I went past where I started just a little bit. Do like 3-4 stitches in the same spot to secure your stitches. Just trying to find my scissors. So we're going to go around and we're just going to make some clips around so it can curve a little easier. But you don't want to cut your stitching. You just want to cut up to your stitching very carefully. And I kind of use the end of my scissors rather than going this way, because if I go this way I might not stop soon enough. But if I use the ends of my scissors, I feel a little more secure that I'm going to stop in time before I clip my stitching. And I'd say, oh, I'm going to do these, around probably about a ½ inch apart from each other. Just so I can get this to, ease up and lay a little more flat for me. That piece doesn't want to cut right there. There we go. And just continue to do that all the way around until you come back to where you started. Anytime that you do a curve when you're sewing, you have to do these little clips. Okay, so now we're going to fold our binding so that it goes to the back side. So it almost looks like a little hat. And I'm just going to go around the inside and I'm going to press this down. And if you want, what I would do is I would use clips or pins. Oops. So I'm just, as I fold it to the back, I'm going to put a clip on. And I'm going to use quite a few clips, just so that I make sure that this is laying flat. And I'm just going to press my finger up against the seam and lay this that we sewed down flat as I go. And then come to the top side and just kind of finger press and put on a clip. And I'll just keep doing that all the way around my binding. And you can kind of see whether or not your binding is staying even as you go. Getting a little tongue-tied. And just go around your edges on the inside and press that down. And I'm just going a little ways at a time. And when we press this, it will come out flatter. Now for this one, the reason why I'm turning my binding to the back side is so that we can see more of the picture that we fussy cut for the front. Now it doesn't have to be a picturesque piece of fabric. You could use any fabric to do this with. But if you're making placemats and a table runner, it's just kind of nice to have some little mug rugs to put with it. And if you find a part that's bulky, just push it down with your finger on the inside. Press your seam down. And I'm just trying to keep this flat so when I fold it over, it just folds over that and stays intact. Now this will be a little bumpier here because this is where I connected my two pieces. And we'll just go a little slow when we go over that spot. I did get a tiny pucker in there, but once we press it, that'll look flat. It won't look bad. And if you're using pins, just do the same thing. Just put a lot of pins in as you go around. Now this looks kind of funky right now, but once we get it sewn and get it pressed, and maybe even starch it a little bit, it'll look pretty good. Now I'm checking the back side because right here I can see that if I sewed it like this, I have a piece that's not going to be flat underneath where it needs to be. So I'm going to take that clip out and I'm going to push that under with my finger so it's nice and flat in there, because I want to make sure I get everything so it sews when I go around. I've got a couple threads that I need to trim on the back side. There we go. Okay. So now, normally if you were doing your binding like this, you would use a stitch in the ditch if you're stitching on the top side and have your binding going to the back. But I'm going to use a regular one, and I'm just, since this is a small piece, I'm just going to watch it as I go around in a circle. So I'm going to go back to a straight stitch and go back to my 2.0 stitches, and I'm just going to watch that my seam stays lined up with that center mark on my foot. So when I bring my needle down, I'm gonna hold on to my thread so I don't lose my thread as I do this. I'm gonna use my hand wheel on the side, and I'm just gonna slowly bring my needle down so that I can see that it gets into the seam. There. And that kind of gets us started. And we'll do the same thing as we go around. And we're just going to keep an eye on that. And we're going to pivot this a little bit at a time and go a little bit slow so that we can focus and stay on that, in that seam. And we'll take clips out as we go. actually, I'm going to get my iron turned on so it will be warmed up by the time I get around the rest of this circle. And if you feel that it's not staying flat, mine's not staying as perfectly flat as I would like it to be, you might want to do your clipping at about maybe 1/4 of an inch apart and do more clips in it. And I'm going to sew around till I get back to the beginning. And then I'm just going to, I have a fix on my machine, so I'm just going to do that, or you can do a little back and forth. Whoops. So you just want to go around, and any threads that you see that need trimming, go ahead and trim those. Clean it up. So I sprayed mine with a little bit of Best Press, and I'm just going to shape it. I'm just going to turn it and shape it, and I'm stretching just a little bit as I go so I can get this to round out and flatten for me. And then I'm just going to, well, I'm going to turn it so it's on the back side first. And I'm going to press. And this will help it to set in a nice circle for you. And I'm going to use my quilter's clapper on it. And the quilter's clapper really comes in handy because it absorbs the wood, the hard wood. You don't want a shellacked one, but if you use this, it absorbs some of the moisture. And I just press a little bit. And it also helps retain heat and keeps the heat going down into it, which helps it to set a little bit better. And then I'm going to do my top side. I sprayed probably just a little bit too much Best Press. Oops. And you can go ahead, and I'm going to stretch this just a little bit more so that I get that nice circle that I want. And I see one more thread to trim there. And I'm just going to do my quilter's clapper on it and give it a second till it cools down, and then I'll do the other side. And I think I would have clipped just a little bit more, like 1/4 of an inch instead of a 1/2 an inch. But once you get it shaped, It's pretty cute. And it will go nicely with the egg-shaped placemats. It's going to bug me that I got this little curve in it. Okay, so there we have a cute little mug rug, and I think that these are just going to be really cute set up on the table with the placemats and the table runner. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful. And if you have found it helpful, please take a moment and like the video. This has been Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry. Please subscribe to our channel. And next to the subscribe, there's a little bell. If you click on that little bell, you can change the notifications. And if you change it to all, each time that we come out with a new tutorial, you'll get notified. And we're going to be doing some wonderful tutorials coming up through the rest of April, and so many cute things in May as well. I'm going to be showing how to do different ways of doing binding. This is one way of doing binding. I'm going to show regular binding. I'm going to show you the flange binding. Many other tutorials throughout the month. There's a lot of them. So I hope that you'll be joining us again. Happy sewing!